Science is, in a word, complicated. Though I've covered the healthcare industry for almost a decade, I'm still a layman when it comes to understanding the depth of research and scientific rigor behind medications and clinical treatments on the market. If you don't believe me, you can go back and check my grades from the New York State Regents exams for biology, chemistry, and physics. Spoiler alert, they're not good. I imagine many medical marketers often run into this challenge too, which is why I'm glad that there's a drug maker out there utilizing immersive audio and visual elements to break down these heady concepts in a digestible yet engaging way. Earlier this month, Regeneron debuted Science Illuminated, which is now available on Spotify. The series is born out of the work the New York-based drug maker has undertaken across a range of therapies, with audio narration and scientific imagery produced by the company's employees. It's already been a busy week for our reporter Bella Jakowski, between her ongoing reporting for the 60th anniversary issue of the print magazine and breaking the news about the C-suite shakeup at Publicis Health Media last Friday. Yet on top of all of that, she brings us a conversation with Regeneron's head of research communications, Ella Campbell, about Science Illuminated. Campbell details the drug maker's reasoning for producing the series, how it was developed, and what the company has learned from experimenting with new approaches to science communication. For our trend segment, I'm joined by Bella and pharma editor Lesha Bushek for their thoughts on Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's decision to publicly document freezing her eggs, the backlash to it, as well as how this is a watershed moment for discussions around fertility treatments in America.
I'm so pleased to be joined today by Ella Campbell, who's the Director of Research Communications at Regeneron. So let's start off, Ella. So for listeners who haven't experienced Science Illuminated, how would you describe the series and what did Regeneron set out to accomplish with it?
Yeah, great questions. Thanks for having me today. I'd say Science Illuminated was a fun take on something that we've been doing for ages at Regeneron, and that's taking these scientific images that various scientists around our labs have been taking and then using them in a way to talk about the beauty of science. So this particular series takes these different scientific images and then couples them with really soothing audio and music that leads you through a meditative process on different scientific topics. So it's really meant to be a moment to sit in the calm and beauty of science and appreciate it a bit deeper in a new, different way.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely the impression I got. Were there any sort of particular communication challenges or audience insights that prompted you to go that direction with something like a little bit less traditional, more meditative?
I mean, I would say we wanted to do something unique. We've done, and we continue to do, a lot of effective scientific communications around particular data milestones or research areas, whether it be antibodies or genetic medicine. So this was an opportunity to do something a bit different that was really intended to connect Regeneron with different therapeutic areas or disease areas or modalities, so we could be seen as leaders in that space. But really, it's not about the specific program. It's about our love and interest of the science in each of these different areas. So it's very intentionally not focused on a piece of our therapeutic work and more broadly about our love of these different areas of science.
Absolutely. And how's the reception been so far? Have you gotten any feedback on it?
Yeah, it's been really positive. I think it helped internally, especially, that each of the images was captured by one of our scientists. And then I actually poached one of our scientists in the preclinical manufacturing and process development group and helped her discover her second career as a voiceover artist, because I heard her at a town hall. She just has a really calming, beautiful voice, and she was game to give this a try. So we had her set up with a mic and did multiple run-throughs, but she really leaned into it. And I think that has allowed us to have this really beautiful finished product that's had really nice, positive reception, especially with our own colleagues.
Allow your body to come to rest. Let your breath settle into a steady rhythm. Take in the image captured by DCN.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. It's cool that it came from someone that, was sort of in and around, and that it can serve to sort of bridge connections within the organization and out. That's sort of ideal. So there's often, I think it's safe to say, an assumption that making science accessible means making it like shorter or simpler. I think in the age of like TikTok and Instagram Reels and stuff like that, if you've seen, and we think a lot about here at MM+M, like how drug makers or agencies that work with them can make information both like educational, but also like digestible and something that people aren't going to like scroll past super quickly because it's, complicated. This series definitely asks people to slow down, and it doesn't, I don't think, necessarily cater to that sort of like attention grab, like hook, like, type of thing. Why do you feel like it's certainly a unique approach, but why do you feel like that is the right approach here?
In this instance, we were leaning into our podcast channels where we're building more of a following and trying something new on them. So we wanted to experiment a little bit with different types of content to see what resonated. And we were inspired by short, engaging pieces that you might find on Calm or other apps along those lines. And then hearing from our own scientists about how they have this moment of zen in the labs a lot of times. So I would say we really were looking to see if something so calm and, to your point, a bit longer than you're typically seeing right now online, if that would resonate with our various science curious audiences. So far, so good.
And you sort of started answering my next question. You mentioned that the series is popular internally, but I'm curious as to like the external audience, who the intended audience is. Is it people who are already interested in science, or people who, would otherwise avoid like such technical material?
Yeah, I would say it's really the science curious audience who won't be experts in these areas. We're really looking to awaken an interest and a passion and a desire to learn more about different scientific areas. And that's the level of detail that we're going into in each of these episodes too. So it's really a moment to learn and relax and soak it in at the same time. So yes, we're definitely going for the types of folks who aren't going to be geneticists or lab techs or what have you, and they're more curious and want to learn more.
Which is exactly the top population, the type of folks who it's so important to garner scientific literacy among, certainly. If you could just sort of walk me through, or like pull back the curtain a little bit, again, for like our audience of medical marketers and whatnot, like how you decide as a team what sort of topic makes a good episode, how you decide, what's engaging, what's like current, versus like what's maybe not so timely right now.
So I would say we go about deciding what to focus on based on a bunch of different forces. So some of it's going to come from our own scientists where they're excited about a particular area that we're making good progress in. I think proteomics and immunogenicity, both of which were covered in this series, are great examples of that. So on the immunogenicity side, it's something that we've been working on for a while, and we're trying to figure out how we can come up with a better solution for when your body receives a second dose of a gene therapy that's directed using a delivery vehicle that's an adeno-associated virus, an AAV. And your body right now reacts and it can say, no, we're going to attack that AAV and not let the therapy get through. So that's a problem for when you need second dosing. And it's something that we're looking to address. And we wanted to talk about that unique biological response and how we are thinking about it. And then on the proteomics front, I think what's interesting there is it's something that our genetics center, the Regeneron Genetics Center, is expanding to include as well. So in addition to layering on early genetics into all of our different therapeutic programs and into optimizing our clinical trials, we now are able to also tap into proteomics, which is the study of proteins. And it gives you this nice snapshot throughout someone's life to understand, they may have started at this point potentially with, let's say, you get a certain rating with liver disease, and then a couple years later, you check in again, evaluating the same proteins, and you may see different levels. And it gives you a better, closer understanding of where that person's disease progression may be. So I would say these two areas in particular were really interesting and exciting for our internal scientists, and speaks to in the immunogenicity example, a common obstacle many other people in the industry are encountering. And on the proteomic side, it's something that others are also exploring. So I think we wanted topics that felt special to Regeneron and what we care about and what we're working on and what we're excited about, but also relatable to others out there in the field and who may be going through their own health event as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, we've touched on at various points in this conversation that you involved the scientists, the people at Regeneron who are working on these things. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some like unforeseen or like unexpected benefits of like involving scientists like so directly in the communications like that, and then also maybe some things that are a little bit difficult in like translating the science?
Sure. So in terms of involving the scientists, I always love getting the latest and greatest from them directly to understand what they see as the next great thing, the next great jump in progress, and also what they're seeing as obstacles. So I do involve them early, not only in selecting the individual themes, but then also in reviewing the content, making sure it's accurate and reflective of where we're at. And honestly, it gets them excited about it too. So it feels like a win-win. Not only am I going to ensure that I have accurate content, but they're going to be more engaged once it does go live. And then remind me your second question.
Sort of just like where it's difficult, I'm thinking about like medical affairs and how, sometimes like in sort of in the same vein as we were talking about earlier, which is like when you try to convey science to a general audience, it can be a little difficult not to like hedge or like trim it down too much to where it's like lacking accuracy or nuance. So I'm just curious, like whether from like a communications standpoint and like a scientific standpoint, if there are any sort of like kinks to work out there or things that, like you're at the drawing table and you're like, how do we best communicate this with the scientists as opposed to maybe just an internal like marketing or comms team? Like what are the sort of unique challenges in doing that with people who are actually working on the science?
I would say it's important to factor in who our audience is and ensure that the scientists who we're working with understand that and that we're tailoring it to them, and that this isn't the only time that we're reaching out to various audiences. So there's a time and a place for when we go deeper on the science and deeper into a particular program, and I will also engage them for that. And then when we do different series like this one, where it is very intentionally for the science curious, as I had mentioned, and very, very purposely about the beauty of science and not our specific programs. It's more about our love of science and solving these disease problems. They'll get on board with that. I think the key here is this sense of collaboration and partnership when creating the content. So they're bought into it as well. They understand the purpose of a particular piece of content and why we're looking to do what we're doing.
Absolutely. And just maybe one more question for you. If we could just look into the future a little bit, what does success look like for Science Illuminated? Maybe beyond, the amount of streams or views, like looking at the broader picture for Regeneron, what do you hope to come from this series?
I do hope it does well in terms of some of those metrics you mentioned, so we can play with it more and use that sort of format. I do think this audio format can be really conducive to a bunch of different channels. So having another way to use that forum is helpful, and we can explore new topics. I also do think there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to our science. 5 topics is just barely scratching the surface. So being able to go a bit deeper, and who knows, maybe when we do more episodes, there'll be a new collaboration deal that we really want to talk about, a new therapeutic approach, and that's the perfect opportunity. So having a chance to dive a little bit deeper into a wider array of topics would be great. And I'd see that as a real win. And honestly, to continue to hear from internal and external folks that this is inspiring and calming and helps them feel like they have digested and learned at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, great. I certainly enjoyed the series. Ella, I appreciate you coming on to talk to us more about it, and we hope to have you back on the show again soon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
campaign chemistry.
The very best of outdoor advertising is when you see it, you go,
A weekly podcast from Campaign US featuring conversations with creatives and marketers leading the industry.
Mike Peck is the Vice President of Creative at Brooks Running.
Xanthi Wells, VP of Global Creative at Pinterest.
Hi, Megan Lally here from High Dive.
Today, I was able to grab Aaron Starkman, Global CCO of Rethink.
Listen, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. And for the latest news in our industry, visit campaignlive.com.
We'll hop right into the conversation here. And this is a conversation that I kind of thought we might have had last week, but I wanted to see how the whole saga was going to play out. And I think it's more opportune to have the conversation now with Bella and Lesha, the two women on our team here, to talk about AOC and her egg freezing journey. And really how I wanted to kind of frame it for our audience is like looking at this, politics aside, as more of a discussion about fertility and women's health. And it's one that I find, you know, just sitting here as the guy on the conversation, as very empowering, something that I think we can talk a lot about the stigma and shame aspect of it, in addition to the cost and access side of the conversation. But one that, as I've seen this play out over social media in a very direct, accessible way, has been very cool to see. It's been very normalizing for something that I think people go through on a daily basis, but don't necessarily talk about. And so, Bella, I want to throw it over to you first, just in terms of like, at the time of this recording, we're on day 12. This all started on August 8th when AOC made a very public Instagram post, and every day has been posting from her personal account saying, this is the journey that I'm on. This is the treatment and medication, everything. What has been your response to it?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, we talk a lot about health influencers and, you know, who works with various brands and what does that do to their personal brand and vice versa. What's the sort of synergistic effect there? But like, she is a celebrity, but she is uniquely positioned as a politician talking about something that is inherently political because it brings up so many access and affordability issues. And so, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of her online for sharing publicly about this because, you know, people are saying, oh, she wants to have it all, or, you know, whatever, like, she's gamifying, you know, having kids maybe someday. But it does really just feel to me more like her shining a light on what is an inherently really tricky, convoluted, and expensive system. And as a politician, how she's going to, you know, ultimately go through the same like trials and tribulations as any other person undergoing the process. And
we can't, you know, speculate. There's all these conversations. We'll get into the criticism side of it too, where it's like, oh, is this all a play because she wants to run for the Senate seat in 2028? Does she want to run for president? And what does that all mean? Politics aside, this is still something I think is worth discussing, the headlines that it's generated, which I think largely, I think you can look at it and say like 70-30, 80-20 has been largely positive. We'll get into more of the hand wringing from Republicans and conservatives. But Lesha, what's been your response to seeing this play out in a very public and very, I would say, intimate way? Like, you're seeing her actually take the shots in these videos.
Yeah, I mean, my initial response is just, you know, as you mentioned, I think you used the word empowerment, but kind of like, you know, watching this as a woman, it feels like I'm glad she's doing it. I'm glad that she's shining light on something that a lot of women face and isn't talked about a lot. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about celebrities in healthcare marketing and pharma marketing and why it's important to have famous people kind of be a spokesperson about different health issues. And it's just interesting that she's been garnering such a negative reaction, in addition to some positive reactions, when, you know, if it was a man in Congress talking about his journey with prostate cancer, it would be a completely different response. It would probably be lauded. He'd probably, you know, get a lot of sympathy. And so I think like the fact that it's so controversial just kind of highlights the fact that women's health, being able to talk about women's health and things like fertility is still so stigmatized. And there's still a lot, you know, there's a long way to go still when it comes to talking about these things. And I think that's one of the takeaways for healthcare marketers here too, is that even though they've made a lot of strides in kind of raising awareness about women's health issues over the years, and bridging some of those gaps, the really controversial response to this shows that there's still ways to go.
And I think it does put a slight damper on the conversation. I reached out to a few brands to see if they want to come on and have this conversation with us, just because it's been so prominent in the news. And you would think if you're a women's health brand or fertility medication company, you would want to come on, and they chose not to. And maybe that's because we're in such a hyper partisan time where they look at somebody and say, oh, AOC, this topic, we don't want any part of it. But it is something that I don't know about the two of you is so normal. I know plenty of people, people that are close to me, people that are more of acquaintances that have either frozen their eggs, frozen embryos. We had the conversation a couple of years ago, Lesha, when the whole IVF Alabama ruling was coming down. Like, these are very normal modern times. And the idea that people still look at this with kind of a crooked lens, I don't know. It doesn't compute with me from the reality that I'm living in. Yeah, because
the whole egg freezing process is a very similar process to what happens in IVF, like the whole, all of like the shots and everything. Like, I have a couple of friends who've been going through IVF, and they kind of explained the process to me. And they have to take shots on a daily basis. They have to go in under anesthesia to have the eggs retrieved. So like the whole process of getting eggs retrieved and having them frozen is a very similar process to what happens during IVF anyway. And so her shining the light on it, it's not just about eggs freezing. It's about kind of like the whole fertility process. The Trump administration has said that they supported IVF because of their stance on promoting family and women having kids. So I guess it's like a little confusing why they would be negative about something like this, like a woman wanting to preserve her fertility for the option of having kids. But yeah, so I kind of view it as just her like educating people about the scientific process, like the medical process behind egg freezing and IVF.
Bella, is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of like seeing, because there is a cognitive dissonance there too, in terms of like, to Lesha's point, we want to have more families, more kids. We want to have this, not necessarily a baby boom, but we want to have this explosion in that part of the economy. And that was something that was brought up by Trump when he was campaigning after the Alabama ruling. It was like, no, we are a party of IVF. We want to be supportive in that way. And then when you see a woman, albeit a progressive Democrat, come out there and say, oh, I want to be able to do this. And, the news came out shortly after she started on this journey that she was no longer engaged to her fiance, that it's like, oh, this would be a single, and it just turns into this whole concept. I don't even know what it means to have it all. That feels just like empty buzzwords, but I'm just curious what you make of that kind of conjecture.
Well, I think that the reason she's being scrutinized so heavily is because, she's pointed out that she's early in her political career, because people have political careers until they die in the United States. And so she's like, I'm like leaving the options open for myself. Like I, might want a family someday, all of these things. Like, yeah, like the situation around her relationship and her personal life, like we're not privy to all of those things, of course, but she is doing the things that the GOP has historically said, has been behind, having kids, forming that nuclear family and whatnot. But now she's like, AOC is like, okay, yeah, maybe I want that, but I'm also going to think about how the timing makes sense. And they're like, you're not going to get sidelined by pregnancy? Ooh. Right? And so I have to wonder like how much that is factoring into this scrutiny of her being like open and honest online. Like, is it really about her undergoing this process, or is it about her, political ambition and how a technology and progress in IVF and fertility and egg freezing and embryo freezing like allows people to sort of quote unquote have it all, be able to have an ambitious political career, any career, and have a family. So yeah, it is an interesting sort of clash in talking points, I would say, that, yeah, I'm curious to see how it continues to play out, especially among like the Republican Party and commentators there.
I would love to ask you both a question too, because I think it gets back to this idea about stigma and shame. And, I've covered it from the perspective of like fertility campaigns that talk about the fact that like infertility is a widespread issue, both among men and women. It's just something that often gets placed on the woman because they end up carrying the child instead of like, oh, this is something that could be from the man. But when it comes to this particular discussion, and Bella, maybe you can kick us off, Lesha, you can hop in. Like, I'm just curious what you make of it, where it's like, we talk about all these campaigns for stigma, whether it's like a dermatological condition, recovering from a cancer or something like that. And that can all be well and good in the abstract. I think she is almost in a way manifesting some of that. And you're getting a better sense of like, oh, when you come out there and say, I'm doing this as part of my health journey, and then you see a very visceral response. Obviously, it's heightened because of her stature as a public figure. It's also like, no, but this is what people go through. Like if you were, working as a waitress in Oklahoma and you were like, oh, and then you got that response. I'm just curious what you make of that in terms of like, as it relates to women's health.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm trying to think. I almost see overlaps between like GLP-1 use and this conversation. Any sort of, taking the reins of one's own health. The GLP-1s are obviously cost prohibitive for a lot of people, would benefit a lot of people. Egg freezing, the same way.
All the analysis I saw said it runs into easily the 5 figures if you don't have insurance coverage for it, which most insurers don't cover.
They don't. Yeah. And I checked, and the insurance plan offered doesn't cover it either. It has some aspects of fertility coverage, but not egg freezing. So yeah, I mean, I just think it's really interesting to think about just how nuanced the considerations are. Like in terms of public response, you like someone like this comes out and says, this is something I'm doing. There's, I think people are factoring in their like socioeconomic status, their, the position of power they hold or they don't hold. And there are ways to like poke at anyone's decision based on like a series of factors, especially when they're a person that is as controversial as AOC. Lesha, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I guess I would just say that I think like if men were the ones who had like quote unquote a ticking clock on their fertility, their the access and pricing issue might be a little bit different around some of these things because we know that like women have historically had to pay more for certain treatments. They've had less access to different types of medical care and treatment. And if it was a situation where men felt like they were running out of time and they needed to preserve their fertility, I think maybe there would be like more options available. So I personally don't see why people are angry about her talking about this or about her doing it. I mean, it's like her choice, and I don't really understand why so many Americans are like angry about her doing this.
And to your point, Lesha, about the ticking clock, AOC is 36 years old. She's going to be turning 37 in October. So, I mean, that's right around the corner. And there is obviously the cliff in terms of one's own fertility, in terms of the amount of eggs that they have as they get older in life, something that she's mindful of and something she's discussed in these videos. I want to talk a little bit about that just from the education perspective, because we've talked about like, I don't want to say the re-advent, but the resurrection of Reddit as a health information hub has been something where it's like, you got a stuffy cold, you got a stuffy nose as part of a cold, you go there and you're like, oh, like what treatment option or whatever it is. Like people consult there because that's where there is community and that's where there are insights and the real patient-led experience. And I think this is kind of a 1-for-1 in that. Like I would think that if I was going through the fertility journey, I would be like, oh, well, AOC is showing me literally every day, step by step, how this goes and answering questions or comments or thoughts that I have along the way. And that's seemingly invaluable. I mean, these are racking up millions of views on each video. And I have to imagine that there are some people who are either going through it or considering it, saying like, this is a reference point that I now have, the same way you would go to a Reddit forum for the same information.
Yeah. And that's always just been so her brand. Like she's done her little Instagram lives and her, where she's sort of just like in her like cozy clothes talking about like what happened on the floor that day. And so she obviously has, I think she really sort of is an example of what a lot of the pharma marketers we talk to want to sort of not recreate, but like the type of messaging they aim for. And, people are sad. People are listening to her. They're hating on her. They're commending her, but they're listening. And again, that's in part due to her status and her power. But like, yeah, it's really interesting. It almost resembles like that type of, obviously it's more like unidirectional, but that type of like informal sort of Reddit style communication that people are having.
Yeah, I think like, you know, the idea that political figures had to be super buttoned up and not talk about personal things directly to their audience, like that's over, right? Like political figures now are very, very active on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Trump himself has been super active on social media and talking directly to people in a really informal way. And so the idea that her doing this on Instagram being like inappropriate or something, I think like we're in a totally different time frame now. We're in a different era. It's 2026. Everyone is on social media, and political figures now are using these platforms to speak more informally to Americans. So I see this as just kind of being like the way of the future as well. And I'm sure, you know, maybe others will follow in her footsteps, but I see it as a positive. I think like she's probably making a lot of people feel like they have something to maybe hold on to if they're thinking about going through this process themselves, and seeing like a public figure going through it can, you know, like we've talked about with other celebrities in healthcare marketing campaigns, it can make people feel less alone in their own health journeys. So I think it's really important.
And I think it's different too in terms of like just double clicking on that point where it's like, I think about like when I first joined, I was going through the archives. I remember like when Bon Jovi did like an Advil commercial. It's like, I'm John Bon Jovi and he's holding up like a little Advil bottle. And it's like, yeah, that's like cool. And now like I associate you with holding up that little bottle. But like when I'm listening to AOC, not the politician, as the patient, and it's like here, and she's like, you know, sanitizing her side, doing the shot, walking you through that whole process. Like, and going back to your parallel, the GLP-1s, like that is something that is so much more accessible and real. And I know that the marketers that we talk to, whether they're on the agency side or the brand side, are always like, oh, but we can't fully control the messaging. There's talking points and we don't want to get in trouble with ISI. It's like, those are all considerations. And it's not saying that you have to work with AOC, but say that you did have a celebrity that's like, I'm embarking on this, and like that can be your partner. Like there are possibilities of doing this where it's like it can still feel very real and not contrived, and you get your point across to your audience. Like I would think that there is a brand out there that can look at this and say, okay, so how can we not necessarily recreate it, to your point, Bella, but like take those hallmarks and actually put it into a campaign that can go to work, because this is something that's astonishingly real.
I also think maybe there's a point to be made about her platform, and well, like I almost feel like the majority of the criticism, maybe not the majority, but a large part of it is like not about her freezing her eggs, but about why she's being public with it. And people are like acting like it's like cringe, look away. Why are you like, that's a private thing? Like,
if I can just hop in, this is what The Hill says. The Hill says, quote, conservatives have gone after Ocasio-Cortez for crafting what they refer to as the illusion that women can have it all, as she promotes a costly medical procedure without a guaranteed success rate.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I guess I'm just like, people are like, cool, have kids, have a family, like do the whole nuclear family thing. We don't want to see the nitty, like if it doesn't work exactly like it, how you explain to your children how babies are made, like
birds and the bees.
Yeah. If it doesn't look exactly like that, linear, without complication, without any sort of intervention whatsoever, don't talk about it. Just keep that to yourself. It's like too much for an audience. You know, that's like so much the underlying vibe of this. It feels like, they're like, okay, like do your thing, but like, you don't have to tell everyone about it. And like, that's exactly why she should tell people about it. Obviously it's like, you know, it's I think that's where a lot of the conservative criticism comes from, is they're like, that's just like not exactly like G or PG rated in the cultural conversation. And I think that's important for like, because what I was saying earlier, like people are sat there listening to her, and like positive or negative reactions are engagement. And like those are, I mean, obviously brands don't want negative engagement, but you know, it's conversation starting, and it shapes the discourse.
The only thing that I'd add on to there too, and again, not to keep drawing parallels to other conditions or disease states, but it does kind of remind me of like when people talk about depression, anxiety, mental health. And it's like one of those things where it's like, you want people to get better. You want people to take action that's going to improve their lives. But when there still is that stigma, and I hear every single time that we cover any of those campaigns, like, oh, you're on an antidepressant, you're on an antipsychotic, you're on whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, didn't you want me to get better? Didn't you want me to lose weight? Didn't you want me to start this family? Like whatever that parallel is. And it's like, yeah, but we didn't want to see how the sausage was made. And this is in a very real way. And obviously it's got the sheen of Instagram, but like even that is just her setting it up on her kitchen counter and then going through what is ultimately a very personal, intimate process with her own decision making behind it. So, I mean, if there's one final word that I want to just say on it is like, and as I was putting my notes together when we were coming up with this conversation, it's like, this is what, lowercase, all lowercase letters on this, Planned Parenthood is in its essence. This is how you plan for a family on your terms. Would it have been different if she was still with her fiance? Who knows? I think that only amplifies further on the narrative, but this is what female bodily autonomy when it comes to medical decision making is at its proudest. And that's how you got to recognize it, at least from, where our audience is coming from, is like this, there are a bunch of lessons to be learned here. And there's an overall ethos that you can tap into. You've got to cut through the noise to get to it.
Agreed. I'm interested to have, continuing conversations about this with the agencies, about, sort of what the trickle down cultural effect is going to be from this whole saga.
I expect many more pitches in that realm where it's like, you may have seen AOC's fertility journey. So we'll see where that all goes. But I really appreciate you both coming on here and being able to offer the perspective, certainly as the women on our editorial team, to be able to kind of guide this conversation. So I thank you both for chiming in on this. It'll be interesting, like you said, to see where it all unfolds. That's going to do it for this week's episode of the MM+M podcast. Thank you for listening. Please be sure to check out our morning newsletter, The Prescription, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also subscribe to our print publication by going to mmm-online.com. We'll be back in your inbox next week with another episode. So stay tuned. In the meanwhile, take care.
The MM+M podcast is produced by Jack O'Brien, Lesha Bushak, Steve Madden, Jamison Fleming, Bella Chakowski, Bill Fitzpatrick, and Gordon Failer. Listen, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts.
Campaign chemistry.
The very best of outdoor advertising is when you see it, you go,
a weekly podcast from Campaign US, featuring conversations with creatives and marketers leading the industry.
Mike Peck is the Vice President of Creative at Brooks Running.
Santhi Wells, VP of Global Creative at Pinterest.
Hi, Megan Lally here from High Dive.
Today, I was able to grab Aaron Starkman, Global CCO of Rethink.
Listen, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. And for the latest news in our industry, visit campaignlive.com.